So hello everyone, thank you for joining. So today for the ECR BSGCT meeting, we have a panel of 4 speakers, all of them in industry. So if you have any question, please just send your questions on the group chat and we will go through them. So I'm gonna ask the speakers to give a brief introduction of what they do. So let's start from Alan Parker. So if you can summarize a bit what you do, how you are involved with industry.
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Ali. So I'm Alan Parker. I feel a little bit of a fraud being on this panel because I'm actually a full-time academic based at Cardiff University, where I run a lab that works on developing oncolytic viruses. But as part of that role, I have moved some of our intellectual property into a commercial partner where we're hoping to take that through to clinical trials. So I'm, as well as being a full-time academic, also putting my foot in or a toe in at least into industry as well. So maybe you can give a bit of a look about both different aspects, industry and academia.
Thank you. Maria, she's a PhD student, so if you want to give a brief introduction to what you do.
Yeah, sure. First of all, I want to thank to Ali just for inviting me for the roundtable. And well, as you said, I'm Maria. I studied biotechnology in Valencia, Spain, and then I moved to Barcelona. I did a couple of masters, and now I'm running my industrial PhD. I am the 3rd year, and I belong to a company which is called Integra Therapeutics. And here, well, I'm doing my PhD, and hopefully I will finish in 1 year.
Bob, thank you. Ilaria Santeramo, if you want to give a brief introduction to.
Hi everyone. My name is Ilaria Santeramo. I'm a group leader of analytical development in resolution therapeutics. So I'm 100% industry. In my role, what I do, I orchestrate the AD team to develop methods to characterize cell therapy products. And in the specific, we work with macrophage engineer macrophage products. So that's the focus of our research and development.
Thank you so much. Last but not least, Ricardo, if you want to give us a brief introduction.
Thanks, Ali, and thanks, everyone. So yeah, my name is Ricardo. I work as a staff scientist at Sania Therapeutics, where I lead the promoter and the gene regulatory element development pipeline. I think a bit in similarly to Alan, but in the opposite way. I'm full-time based in industry, but I still try to stay involved with academia. So I have some collaborations still ongoing at UCL. And yeah, that's something that we're also pursuing in Sania to validate some of our research pipelines.
Okay, thank you. So we have a few questions, so I'm gonna go through them and then we can start a bit of a discussion. And also I think it's great because I have people from different stages of their career, so I think this should be great. So let me start with the first question, which is basically, I am always curious about the balance of desk work versus lab work, especially how that can change over time depending on the position. So I think this is quite of a general question. I don't know if any of you want to start replying.
Maybe I can start as junior. I think that I'm the most junior in the round. So I would say that if you compare maybe industry with academia, it's true that in industry, being that I'm PhD, I think that I have maybe more dry lab. I have more meetings maybe comparing with some mates that are doing the academic. But it's true that finally, if you compare an industrial PhD with an academic one, if you ask about the daily routine, it's going to be most of the part the same. It's true that if you do a zoom out, it sounds the same, but if you do a zoom in, maybe you can find the changes about comparing that I think maybe is another question. But if you do the zoom in, you are going to find differences. But if you do a zoom out, it's true that for me right now, I do 80% maybe of wet lab. And I think that maybe Alan, Ilaria, or Ricardo can answer better to this question about how it changed. But it's true that during the industrial PhD, even is industrial, you do many wet lab.
Thank you. I don't know if any of the senior scientists here want to add something like how different it is for you?
Yeah, I mean, I could say something maybe. I guess, you know, I've always found it quite, I don't know, paradoxical, I suppose, in a sense that, you know, you become promoted into more senior posts because you're good at doing lab work. And then as you get more and more senior, you do less and less lab work. So the thing you were good at that got you in that position in the first place, you eventually end up doing basically none of it. So, I mean, now I'm at a position now where I'm running a group, and actually I get most of my kicks from the group meetings where we talk about other people's research. And every now and again, I get allowed in the lab, but it's very rare these days. So, you know, I find myself increasingly academically speaking, on doing lots of paperwork, lots of meetings, all these kind of things, but also helping to guide the research. So that's really how I get my kicks now, by guiding other people's research. And then occasionally I will be let loose in the lab, and I think I probably haven't been in the lab since the lockdown, when I was allowed in the lab and hardly anyone else was around. I don't know quite why I was allowed in the lab and no one else was, but that's how it worked out. This week, in fact, I'm going in the lab for the first time in, I guess, 3 years. And so I will be the butt of all the jokes in the lab as to why I'm in the lab and am I lost and all that kind of stuff. But I'm really looking forward to doing that. But yeah, really, it is true. And I think it's probably true in academia as well as in industry, that the more senior you get, the more your time is occupied by paperwork and meetings and these kind of things. So for sure, for me, the vast majority of my time is doing those things. But like I say, I really get the kicks now from seeing other people's research and talking about those pieces of research and what to do next and guiding studies, rather than actually doing it myself. But very rarely I do get the opportunity to do it myself. Yeah.
Thank you. I don't know if Ilaria, Ricardo, you want to add anything else, or a bit of like in that line, do you actually miss the lab, like doing lab work, or do you rather stick to meetings, collaboration, organizing projects? What do you think?
From my perspective, I totally resonate with Alan. The more senior you become, the less hands-on time you actually have to do techniques or experiments in the lab. I do miss it sometimes, yes, because it's what, you know, keeps us as a scientist. That's what you want to see. You want to see immediately what happens to the experiment that you're doing and whether it works, whether it doesn't work. But at the same time, I think the beauty for me to becoming more senior and senior is how you zoom out and you start understanding what you're doing from different perspectives. It's about connecting the dots more than actually working out how the dot looks like. And actually from the outside, I can still give a lot of input to all the scientists that I work with to make sure that they do the research with a rationale, with a specific aim in mind, to make sure that they know where they're going and so on. So yes, I do miss it, but if I will have to think about the days where I was always in the lab, I don't really miss those full days at all. And, you know, late nights and sometimes weekends that we've all been through. So yeah, I think you need to come to terms that when it comes to becoming a bit more senior, a bit of desk work, it's what you actually need. But I'm the type of person as well that when there are specific days in the lab, I'm the one walking in and checking how the cells how do they look like, how did that work, and maybe probably my scientists don't like me for that because I'm on their shoulders, but not because obviously I want to judge them or anything, but just because I'm so curious to see, you know, how the cells look like, how did they behave, did we get the answers that we wanted to. So yeah, that is my entertainment lately.
Thank you. Ricardo, so in your case, because you said you are opposite to Alan, you're like in industry, but you actually collaborate with academia. Have you noticed any difference or with lab related?
Yeah. So I think in the industry aspect, I guess I'm a bit kind of in between Maria's position and Ilaria, as in I've been in Sanya shy of 2 years now, and yes, I do lead a project. However, it's a one-person project, so that means that I'm quite often in the lab, and I love it. I feel, you know, I'm very passionate about it. It's almost a natural continuation of what I did my PhD on. So for me, it's very exciting. But it is true that I can see it day by day, that the number of meetings and the involvement in even completely different projects that are just connected by a small aspect, really that interplay comes along, and it's all about the communication with other teams and other project managers. Now, the aspect with collaboration with academia is a different one. So I'm very lucky because in Sanya, I've been encouraged to keep my academic interests, and so the odd lectures that I had at UCL, I was allowed to keep, and so that is more of a teaching experience, and therefore is not lab-based. And then as we started our in vivo screening pipeline in Sanya, we established a collaboration with UCL Institute of Neurology. And so that again is completely lab-based. So I change scenery, but I go to a different lab. So yeah, I guess there are differences. But I think in early days, when you start managing a project, there is a lot of lab, and then you see how your day starts to change, your weeks start to change, and months eventually, where you are involved in so many meetings and more desk work. But that will go and that will change as your position and your role will evolve as well.
Thank you. Okay, I think we had like a bit of like a brief view of all of you, which I do appreciate. So moving on to the next question, is there a model by which to split your research and time across academia and industry? So I think this might be more directed to Alan and Ricardo, that you are involved in both academia and industry.
Yeah, okay, so I'll go first. Ricardo's on mute, then that's fine. I was going to offer the other way around this time, but I guess we probably complement each other quite well here, like you say, because we're almost the reciprocal of each other. So I'm always, still a full-time academic, but we've obviously licensed in some technology into a company where I'm CSO of, and that we're trying to take through to the clinic. So for me, I have a split that is full-time or more than full-time academic, as most academics are, but then also doing a bit part role as trying to lead some of the clinical development or the work to take some of our stuff that's gone through the lab, license into a company, and then take it through to the clinic. So having an overseeing role also within TraceApp Therapeutics, which is part of Accession Therapeutics, where we've licensed our technology. So for me, the vast majority of my work, my time is still very much in the academic lab. And that gives me the opportunity to do a sort of very broad breadth of things. Whereas the company, what I tend to look at it as as we have things that come through that look really exciting, we maybe want to translate. That's when we want to get the company involved and maybe take something through commercialization, because that's the point at which you say, well, if we were to try and do something academically to take something through the clinic, it's going to take decades, and it's going to take many millions of pounds. And honestly, it's going to take decades. And by the time you actually reach the point where you can translate it into patient benefit, actually the technology is out of date by quite a significant amount, because it's so slow in academia. So that's where I try and dovetail in the research that's looking really exciting in the academic lab and say, okay, let's try and translate this quickly and efficiently and rapidly. And that's the real advantage here to having a toe into an industry position, where they then can put lots of people onto this and work with the regulators and get stuff through to the clinic much more quickly, and of course fundraise much quicker as well, much quicker than ever you could do grant writing in the lab, believe me, and much bigger sums too. So it's a kind of a niche role that I found now, where I use the academic lab as a very broad discovery tool, and then when you have something really interesting that you think now's the time to capitalize and take this through to patient benefit, to be able to have a foot in an industry lab, to be able to license that in and take that on from there rapidly, is a kind of ideal scenario, I think. So yeah, Ricardo probably has a slightly opposite take on that to me, but that's how I see my role now these days, split between industry and academia.
Yeah, thanks, Alan. Yeah, absolutely correct. However, I'm not the person that does that hard work of the fundraising, and so I feel like a lot of that pressure is off my shoulders. I'm very grateful to my management team, because that's an incredible work. And as you say, yeah, the numbers are huge, and the amount of work that goes into that. But we are very involved in the company trajectory, and so it is very exciting for a scientist to really see what goes on, behind the scenes, and really how can we get to the fastest and the most effective way to reach patients and change their lives, the quality of life, if possible. My personal model, as I said, a lot of the work that I conduct in academia is linked to Sania. So yes, it is. There is a physical barrier because I go to a different place, and so even planning experiments or meeting in the company becomes a bit tricky because you suddenly only have like 2 days instead of 5 in that week. But it can be done, and it's done mostly thanks to the collaboration and the good communication with team members. So being able to rely on very good other scientists, it's very, very useful. You know that if you start an experiment, you can't be there for the second or the third day, someone else can chip in. And this is something that doesn't always happen in PhDs or postdocs from my experience. So this is something that I enjoy, and I think it's really important. And with regards to my academic job, the teaching, that happens in my free time. So it's probably not a good example, but I think this is a very common academic feature. So yeah, that's when it happens.
Thank you. So this is kind of like an example of how different your day-to-day life is. So could you just, for example, let us know what would you do on like a day, or like what would be a normal day for you? I don't know if you want to start, Ricardo, or just to follow up a bit, just like a normal day for you.
Yeah, sure. So we probably have slightly more meetings than what I was used to. However, I should say for the audience, and this is something really interesting because actually I wasn't completely new to the industry setting. So my PhD, a bit like Maria's, was funded by an academic partner. And so I was full-time based at UCL, but I always had to report to our industrial partner. And so that is AskBio Europe. And so from the beginning of my PhD, I used to have milestone meetings and sometimes visits to the industrial partner headquarters. And so that already probably made me used to like having all these different meetings, and sometimes things that may not seem completely relevant to the everyday experiments and projects, but just belong to the broader picture. So yes, I think there's a few meetings. We have a team meeting where we kind of look at the workload and we distribute it between basically amongst all the members of the team, people that chip in the lab or with analysis. And yeah, and then I have my few hours of cloning and molecular biology, which is my favorite. And then, as I said, I'm very involved in the in vivo screening. So then I still conduct some animal work. And then when I have my academic weeks, I will spend more time talking to students, probably writing, preparing some lectures. So yeah, it's not that different really, I think, from my experience in academia. Yeah, let the others follow.
I don't know if someone was to say anything, or like maybe Maria, you're a PhD. Do you actually think the same way?
I have to say that it's true that my feeling is that if I explain my daily routine, it's very similar to an academic one, but also I found that maybe the milestones and the goals are super different from an academic one. Also, the workload that I have to do, accompanying with some mates. So, for example, I would say that, as I said, 80% of my daily it's with lab, and it is what it is. But also, it's true that for example, we have in mind always, all my mates from the company, the milestone of the company. You also have your own short-term milestones, also long-term. Also, you are managing like 3 or 4 or 5 projects. And also, it's super important to have like a big picture of the company. I mean, for example, in my company, I'm in a team that is called Ex Vivo, but the point is that you always are representing a company and maybe you're having different approaches for achieving the same goal. So you always have to have in mind your research, the research of your mates, and also always to keep in mind which is the milestone of your company. So I would say that if I explain my daily routine, it's not going to be like different from academic, but it's true that the approach is really different. And also maybe the meetings that we have, you have to be always being updated in R&D meetings. But it's true that, for example, I think that in a company, you also have many, as he was saying, Ricardo, you have many collaborators and providers meetings because you always want to have the best performance of your reagent or the thing that you are developing. So the point is that not only R&D meetings, always you have to think about the company. You are always optimizing and setting up maybe everything just to have the best performance, then to be able to arrive to clinical trials. So also I think it's the approach, I would say, the difference between academic and industrial.
Thank you. I don't know, Ilaria, as you kind of are in charge in industry, if you want to say anything about it.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, I don't really spend any time in the lab. So usually my days go for meetings over meetings and over meetings. And that is a good thing because I get to meet every person of my team specifically throughout different days of the week where we discuss the experiments that they're doing. I tend to put that in perspective of the big milestones that we actually need to achieve company-wide so that we can have a realignment every now and then in terms of budget, timing that it's needed, deadlines, and so on. So a big part of my job is also making sure that I can digest all of those information in two different ways. One way would be for inputting those information for regulatory documents, and that is really important when you work in a company that is shift from preclinical to clinical, and therefore you need to have quite a lot of documentation that makes sure that you explain properly to the regulators that you have a safe product and that you know what you're doing and you can control it during the manufacturing process. The second part is also making sure that I digest all of this data to the senior leadership team because they don't really have the time, obviously, to dig deep into the actual data. So I need to make sure that the quality, the integrity of the material that is produced from my team is in a form that could be easily shared with the senior leadership team and then for their use to discuss the strategy moving forward. I feel fortunate because in my company as well, I have the possibility of inputting on strategy moving forward for our product, for what the product development is concerned. So that also makes me think about cost of goods, resources of every type, and so on. So yes, it's a lot of meeting, it's a lot of communication between different people, and that is really important because every meeting makes me understand what is the audience, what do I need to deliver to this audience, how do I deliver in a clear way so everyone understands what I need to do, what my team is doing, and making sure that also the people work shines through this communication that is given to the rest of the team. So and everything is internal, as in obviously we don't really have that freedom to go out and disseminate too much of what we're doing. Confidentiality is a big part of what we're doing. So most of those meetings are internal. If we have external collaborations and external meetings, we need to be a little bit careful on how we word things because obviously there is a big IP as part of your company. So you want to make sure that you don't give away the know-how of your product, of your process, but you're still having meaningful conversations on how to progress specific bits of the process. So yeah, that is my days.
Thank you. We have a question actually for you. So now that you're talking, which I think you more or less already mentioned it, but is what is like being a group leader in industry and what is your team like and how involved are you in deciding day-to-day work for your team to do? So I think you already kind of like answered a bit this question. So maybe just kind of say like, what do you think is the most challenging thing to be in your role, like to be a leader in industry?
Communication is really the pillar, I think, of my role. And people development is also very, very, very important. When I was a scientist, I was developing the technique. When I was a senior scientist, I was helping someone else developing a technique. Now I need to make sure that I coach and mentor all my team members to make sure that they deliver what they want for what their aspirations are as well. So it's very important to find that balance on leaving them to decide exactly what they want to do, but coaching them in how to do it, what to keep in mind on when they need to perform an experiment, a work package, a whole project altogether. So there is a lot of people communication that is involved that I think it's essential. And to be fair, is one of the best parts of my job. I like to be with people. I like to let people think and make sure that they have a clear rationale in their minds when they perform some type of experiment. And I like having people also work together to reach a common goal. So this is really the essence of a group leader, making sure that you harness the power for each individual in your team and they reach their maximum. That also sometimes means having difficult conversations because they need to know what they want from their own career. And sometimes this is something that is not always easy to understand where you want to go, especially when you're stuck in a technical role. So that involves maybe finding opportunity for them to do apprenticeships on the side or settlement in other departments so that they really understand what they want from their career, because it's the best way to actually have a good functioning, engaged team together. I hope I answered the question.
Yeah, but it was really interesting to know anyway. So I don't know, Alan, because you're also a group leader, if you want to add anything or just mention the difference maybe.
I suspect there's a huge degree of overlap, to be honest. I mean, as Ilaria said there, mentoring people and looking after your group and making sure that people are developing as you would hope. And of course, in academia, there's also battles to get grants as well and keep people in jobs and all those, you reach a position where your job is tenured, but you realize you've got to look after all these people who aren't tenured, and you've got to find ways to keep people who are finishing their PhDs on grants and keep postdocs on and so on, and making sure that everyone is getting the opportunity to develop their CVs and really develop as an individual is really crucial. So in terms of the challenges, yes, that. But the other thing is, as we sort of said at the beginning, you end up in a tenured position in academia because you're good at doing lab work, and then the lab work gets clawed away from you, and you've got to be a researcher, a teacher, an author of papers. You've got to do public engagement. You've got to be a lawyer, so you understand your IP position. You've got to be on lots of different committees, doing all sorts of. So there's all these things that suddenly you're thrown into doing that you've got to try and juggle all those things as well. So yeah, I think there are significant challenges, but I think a lot of them actually are exactly the same as in industry. Actually, there's not that much different, and actually most of it does come down to the biggest or the most important thing, I say, is people and developing people and making sure that they're secure in their jobs and their roles and enjoying coming to work and enjoying what they're doing and really getting the most out of what they're doing.
Thank you. So we have a really interesting question, actually. So excited to see such a great panel. Thank you. Did you envision yourself having this role in industry, and what advice would you give to ECRs who would want to pursue your career path? I don't know if anyone wants to start, or shall we do like PhD and up to PIs? Maria, do you want to start maybe?
Yeah, I'm gonna start. Yeah. In my case, it's a little bit maybe different as typical or usual, because the point is that now I'm doing industrial PhD, but I started the PhD a little bit late in Spain. In Spain, usually you finish the master thesis when you are 22. Many people start the academic PhD when you are 23. And for me, in my opinion, they don't make the right questions to themselves just to know why do you want to do a PhD. So for me, when I finished my master thesis, the point is that I didn't want to join an academic PhD because it wasn't for me. I didn't want to keep in academia. And for that reason, I joined a couple of spin-off. I was working as research assistant. Then I realized that it's true that if you want to then grow and you have ambition, it's true that in Spain is really difficult. But also for me, what was happening is that I'm I'm really translational. And for example, during my master thesis, I was doing basic research, and it was amazing because we were doing models for diseases. But the point is that once I finished that project, no one was going to continue working with that, and I had the need about what's going next. And just because of having that ambition made me just to join a couple of spin-offs. Then I realized that I could do an industrial PhD. Also, what I can say, industrial PhD is not easy. Why? Because I've been trying to find an industrial PhD since I was 23 years old, and it turns to me when I was 25. So I was 2-3 years in which, wow, I want to go to industry and I don't know what to do. And the point is that you have you have to make you the questions about where do you want to go, and maybe you don't know where do you want to go and how to achieve it, but it's true that you know what you don't want to do. So in my case, I knew that I didn't want to follow academia. My way was to do a second master. Then I realized that I really like medical affairs departments in big pharmas. Then the pandemic arrives and I couldn't enter. So finally, 3 years later, I found the industrial PhD. That it was one of the topics of my life because it was in gene therapy, performing ex vivo editing, and then being able just to improve myself, improve myself in a rational and scientific thought, and also just improving my personal skills that I really needed for if you want to join at some point big pharma. So what I can say is that just do what you think that you have to do, but it's not make you the questions about what you don't want to do, and just continue doing, because then you will find a way to achieve what you want. Maybe a little bit philosophical, but it's life.
Thank you. I mean, I come from the same country as you, and I know it's like that. You finish degree, master, and then you have to go straight into PhD somehow. So it is actually nice to have a different view. So I don't know, Ricardo, any advice?
Yeah, thank you. So I think Maria really summarized it very well. I think even in the UK, one thing that I noticed, thinking about early days, so students coming out of an undergrad or a master's, and they want to approach the industry sector. More often than not, they are told that they do not have the experience. But how are you going to build that experience if you were in academia up until that point? So this is something that I'm very passionate about, actually. And I've started talks between UCL and Sanya so that we can probably try and get students in for internships or even projects. And I know that there are some degree courses that offer sandwich placements, but they're quite rare. They're not that popular. And we should also remember, obviously, this is a BSGCT seminar. So in the context of cell and gene therapy, as Alan was saying, there is a huge potential to get to a clinical application through industry. And so that's something we really need to work on, and in a quite quick manner if we really can. So I think, trying and increasing experience opportunities. So if it just means sending an email to someone and say, can I spend some time? Obviously, it's not quite the same as shadowing someone in an academic lab, because there are so many legal aspects, but it's not impossible. It may be a bit hard, but I think most of the important things in life can be hard at some point. From my personal experience, I think I came to Sanya because there was this very clear opportunity for me to stay in the field that I had studied for, and I really am passionate about. And it was the translatability of my research into the clinical setting. And lastly, I would like people to remember that, and please, the speakers on the panel, whoever can correct me if they think I'm wrong, but I think nowadays the line between industry and academia is not that solid. The lines are a bit more blurred, and I have seen people moving in bi-directional flows, and not just academia to industry, but also going back and bringing so much expertise and different skills that are really, really important in academia as well. And I find that fascinating, and I've seen people thriving just by using the synergy between academia and industry, and I think that's very key.
Thank you. I don't know, Ilaria, you're a group leader, so what would you advise people who want to jump to industry, for example? Like, what are you looking for in your group, for example? What do you think that is really important?
I mean, generally speaking, all the skills that will be required from a scientist, a senior scientist in industry, are exactly the same skills that people are already building during their PhD. Again, it comes down on clarity of communication, making sure that you can communicate your science in an effective way so that everyone can understand. Negotiating and influencing skills, as in, you need to bring me on the journey of why your data are so important for what you're doing. And generally speaking, you need to be keen on, making something work and showing me your problem solving. And all of those skills, to be fair, those are skills that you do learn when you do your PhD, you do learn when you do your master project, regardless. So I think sometimes there's a little bit of a bias from people coming from academia to say, oh, I don't really have the skills that are needed to actually jump into industry. That's not true. It's exactly the same. It's just a different audience, but it's exactly, you're just gonna, communicate your research to a group of people. And that is what I get convinced by. I need to make sure that the person that I have in front of you is going to be a good team worker. So working together with other people to achieve a common goal and not necessarily, keeping everything for themselves so that they don't share with their co-workers. And those are things that, sometimes are innate into people, but sometimes it's exactly what you're doing with your mates in the lab, what you're trying to do, that experiment that is not working. And so that would be for me my advice. Just believe in yourself. You've been doing it already. So just keep doing it and just show me that you want to do that step. And I agree with Ricardo. I've seen many of my previous colleagues actually going back to academia because simply it doesn't suit them. It's not that once we find a route that is going to be it for the rest of your life. Absolutely not. And I think the UK for that. I come from Italy, and I think in Italy it's a bit more complicated to shift between avenues, whereas in the UK that is it's doable, whichever age, whichever step of your careers. So just take advantage, find the right people to talk to, put out your concerns with your supervisor, with your colleagues, try to get out in other way using, for example, the BSGCT to find suitable mentors that you think might help you. And just talk about what your concerns are, because chances are that, just your concerns, and anybody can just dismantle those concerns very quickly. So that would be my advice.
Thank you. Alan, you're a PI and you're mostly in academia, you said. Do you think that you also look for the same things when it comes to your group?
Yeah, I mean, so I just wanted to pick on something that Ilaria said then, which is about people moving between industry and academia, because that's a really important one, actually. It's not a one-way street by any stretch of the imagination. And actually, you'd be amazed by how valued industry experience is in universities, especially as universities are becoming more and more impact focused and looking at spinning out companies and utilizing the IP that they've got. So it's a hugely valuable thing to have a period of time in industry and then come back into the university. So absolutely, you're right, Ilaria. It's not a one-way street. Just in terms of pieces of advice I will give and things I've learned, I think two things I've learned. The first one is, whatever you do, make sure you're enjoying it and make sure you follow your heart in terms of what you're doing. I have never planned anything in my life. My wife will testify to this, but I've always just followed what I found most interesting. So I went A levels. I was doing 3 sciences. I liked biology the best, so I went to university, did biological sciences, and rapidly realized I liked genetics most. So I switched to genetics, and then within genetics, I thought, well, gene therapy is pretty cool. So I went off and found a PhD away from that university in gene therapy, and then got offered a postdoc afterwards in London. Thought, I want to really move from non-viral gene therapy to viral gene therapy. So I jumped to another place up in Scotland. I was up in Glasgow for 7 years because that was the lab that I thought was the best lab in the UK, certainly, for vectorology. And then, I wanted to apply those vectorology skills in cancer, which is why I ended up in Cardiff, because I could bring that sort of collection of stuff, that niche path that I've carved, always following what I was most interested in, to bring in my own group and developing my own group. So always follow your heart and whatever you're interested in. If you enjoy what you're doing, you won't work a day in your life because you're enjoying it the whole time, right? So it doesn't feel like work. And then the other thing I would say, just in terms of advice and things I've picked up along the way, is try and be a can-do person, be solutions driven. So one of the things I've tried really hard to do and the reason I've ended up with a foot in industry is trying to find a way to progress stuff. And actually, it was during lockdown that I was sitting there thinking, God, what are we going to do? How are we going to progress? What actually is the bigger picture of it actually gives me a little period of time to sit back and think, how are we actually going to, all this stuff we're tinkering around in the lab with, how are we going to get this through to the clinic? And that's when those discussions started happening about, I knew academic lab from previous experience in other groups and looking at academic led clinical trials. I knew how long it took and how painful it was and how demoralizing it was for the poor people who were having to do it. I knew that the quickest way to do this and the most effective way and the way to get the technology out there was to try and have some conversations with industry to partner and to get this stuff out there. So, that is an example from my own personal, many different things of trying to find a solution, trying to be solution driven, be a can-do person. You'll come up against loads of people in your career who are can't-do people. There's reasons why you can't do experiments. I'm sure they're in industry just as much as they are in academia, but always try and be solution driven. So find a way to make stuff happen. I think is the critical thing. So yeah, again, a little bit philosophical like Maria there, but they're the things I've learned over my career anyway, and that I would recommend.
Thank you. I think you more or less all think the same way as like just do whatever you want to and feel like doing. So I think we have time for just like one more question if you are okay with that, happy with that. So basically is for speakers that have been in industry and academia, would you say the workload is different? Do you think academia is slightly more intense?
Ricardo, do you want to go first?
Yeah, maybe, and then you can make the point as a more experienced person. I think in academia, I often saw that I was the person setting the bar. And if you're very passionate about what you do, so Alan said, if you love what you do, you basically won't work a day in your life, but it goes both ways. And I think we are all very similar in this, that you just sometimes just keep going. And if you also happen to like it, sometimes it even goes to your own detriment in a way, because you just don't stop. And I'm sure we've all done it in our PhDs and postdocs. I feel like in industry, there is a bit, and that doesn't mean that my mentors were not looking after me. Actually, they were, and very well. That's probably why I kept my sanity. But I feel like in industry, there is a bit more consideration for work-life balance and, trying to really distribute the workload also within the team, as I said at the very beginning. So yeah, those crazy ideas sometimes I have, and I think, oh, this falls on a Sunday, I could just do it. Maybe we say, no, let's just do it next week so that we can do it between Monday to Friday. So those kind of things, in my experience, I feel a bit more protected in that way.
So I think unless Alan, you want to say anything about it?
Yeah, I mean, Ricardo is right. I think I always sort of have a little chuckle to myself when I see my university contract that employs me for 35 hours a week. And we all know that we're doing many more hours than that in the universities. And we're not forced to, but it's hard to get by if you're not doing that, and again, it's about can do. If I want to do all the things I want to do, then I do have to put the extra hours in sometimes, and it's not great, but sometimes I am working early on the weekend before the kids get up and these kind of things. Industry, I think, probably does have a better work-life balance, but I think certainly the more senior people are working in hours that they're scheduled to there as well. I don't think they're all twiddling their thumbs as soon as they get home. Maybe the more junior people can put their lab stuff down and go home. And it's a little bit easier for them to turn off than perhaps it is in the academic lab. But I think you will work hard whether you're in industry or academia. So, you've got to be a bit careful with these things, haven't you? You don't burn out whichever route of life you're taking. And I think there are unhealthy habits in both. But yeah, I think it's probably pretty similar. Maybe Ilaria can probably comment more on work-life balance in industry.
I was going to say, I think the weight distribution is slightly different, as in academia, at least that is my experience, and I've only done a PhD in academia. I felt the weight on me, and therefore I was keep going. late nights, weekends, because I wanted to prove something, probably mainly to myself. In industry, the weight is on a group of people. That doesn't mean that it's easier, because we need to be driven by milestone and deliverables. And sometimes we have, we need to deliver a specific piece of work by X day because there is a lot of money involved in that decision. So it doesn't mean that I don't have late nights. It doesn't mean that I don't have weekends work, but it's taking weight. And it's easier if the weight is taken by the whole team, not just one person. Obviously, part of my job as well is to spot those people that tend to take that weight on, because that is their personality to just keep going, and keep doing. So it's my job also to spot early signs of overachieving people, and making sure that they take a break and they slow down. That there are very intense periods of work in industry as well, especially in small biotechs where there are not that many resources, to get a lot of people to do the work. And the timelines are tight because you need to prove to investors that you're worth the money that they're spending. So, in both, I think in both environments, there are pros and cons. But it doesn't work like that in industry, that 5 p.m. the pen drops and everybody goes on, because unfortunately it wouldn't be sustainable that way. But again, it's just a group effort. So we make sure that it's worth it for the bigger picture and the aim of the whole company. So
Thank you. So I think we are running out of time now, but just kind of like to summarize this panel, a bit of like a philosophical question, I guess. Does any of you have any, maybe regrets is a too strong word, but is there anything that you wish you did differently, now knowing what you know about industry, for example? I don't know if you want to start, Ilaria?
To be fair, I don't really have regrets so far. I've been very fortunate. I spent 6 years at the cell and gene therapy catapult, where I've learned so much about cell and gene therapies. And I think that is a very good stepping stone between academia and industry, in a way, because you have the freedom of exploring so many topics at the same time, which means the workload can be a little bit hard, but you learn you learn so much. Other than that, I'm like Alan, I don't really work with plans, and so far everything has worked out quite well. But I don't really have. I've always went with my heart, and so far I'm still quite happy on the direction that I've taken. So not really regrets from my side.
Thank you. Maria, do you want to say anything?
Yeah, I have to say that I agree with Alan and with Ilaria. It's true that always that you follow your heart is going to be the good option, because I mean, mistake, no mistake. For example, for me, the opportunity of an industrial PhD arrived when I was 25, after 3 years of fighting and many mistakes. It was a mistake. I don't think so, because now I see myself and I see that I'm more empowered than maybe someone who is starting with 22. So I would say that just when you do what you really enjoy, it's a good option. And if you want to achieve it, you will arrive as soon as possible.
So it's never too late to start a PhD.
No, well, depending. But yeah.
Ricardo, I don't know if you want to say anything.
I agree along these lines. I think as long as everybody has their own path, and if you're passionate, there are people that are not passionate and they may need to figure out what they actually like. And so experimenting, I mean, we're talking about science, that's what we are. And so you can also experiment with your career. And as we said, we live in a society in the UK where we can actually quite scientifically explore, and that's a great opportunity. So just don't be afraid to put your foot out there and try.
Thank you, Alan. One last comment.
No, I don't have regrets. I always think there are things that you look at in life and think, well, maybe I'd have done it differently. And that's just called learning. That's fine. I think, I always look back and sort of think about, I wonder what would have happened if I'd done something else. So at the end of my PhD supervisor moved to Oxford. I'd already made the decision I was going traveling around the world and had a ticket booked. So I didn't go to Oxford. So I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I'd gone to Oxford. Would I have swapped that for a traveling ticket around the world? Not in your life, no. So don't have regrets. Just crack on and follow your heart. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, the four of you. I think everyone now has like an idea how industry works, how academia also works, and like how academia and industry can actually work together. That it's never too late to start a PhD or do whatever you want, to be fair, which is quite encouraging. So just before everyone leaves the call, I would like to also mention that we have the BSGCT annual meeting. So it's the 17th to the 19th, sorry, of June, and it's in Oxford. Is all the program, I think, is already on the website. So if you want to check, go ahead. It's gonna be like a nice one. Spoiler alert, you can also have like a few activities planned. So it should be a good one and a lot of networking there. Also gonna say just a bit of like marketing here. Free membership for master and undergraduate students. So I think it's a good opportunity to just kind of like start in science, just meet people, and also your PI is gonna be really happy because you don't really have to pay for it. And postgrad is only 15 quid, 15 pounds. So it's not that much, and it's just annual, and you have also with these you have access to travel awards, which is quite good one. Also we have the writing competition coming soon, so keep an eye on the website. Also comes with a prize, and it's always good when you try to find money to travel or whatever is money for you, so you can spend it on whatever you want. And I think that is all that I have to say. Thanks everyone to join. And this is going to be recorded, so if you ever have a crisis and you don't know what to do, or whether you should go to industry or academia, you can always come and check this panel. So thank you so much, and have a nice day, week, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay.